I got a frantic call. "Dad's had a heart attack. Come quick." I rushed home, only to be ambushed with documents to give up my inheritance. I pretended to sign, then revealed a secret that left everyone speechless. Their faces were priceless. I never imagined my regular Tuesday afternoon would turn into the most calculating chess match of my life. One minute I was finalizing quarterly projections in my downtown Boston office. The next I was gripping my phone so tight my knuckles turned white. "Michael, it's your father!" Diane's voice cracked with what I thought was genuine panic. "He's had a heart attack. The ambulance just left. Please, come quick." My stomach dropped. Dad was only 65, but he'd been having those chest pains lately that he stubbornly dismissed as heartburn. I grabbed my keys and laptop, mumbling something to my assistant about a family emergency. The elevator ride down those 18 floors felt like an eternity. Dad and I hadn't always seen eye to eye, especially after he married Diane just 2 years after Mom passed. But he was still my father. The thought of losing him made my hands shake as I fumbled with my car keys. Traffic crawled along the Mass Pike, every red light another opportunity for my mind to spiral. Dad had built his construction company from nothing, working 16-hour days while still making it to most of my baseball games. When he sold it 3 years ago for 8 figures, I was genuinely happy for him. He deserved that retirement, that security. What he didn't deserve was Diane and her 2 parasitic children, who'd latched onto him faster than barnacles on a ship hull. My relationship with them had always been strained at best. Diane always with those saccharine smiles that never reached her eyes. Tyler, 5 years younger than me and perpetually unemployed despite his business degree. And Jennifer, who somehow managed to crash a new car every 6 months, yet always had the latest designer everything. They'd made it clear from day one that I wasn't welcome in their new family unit. Fine by me, I had my own life, my own successful tech startup. Dad was our only real connection. As I pulled into the familiar oak-lined driveway of my childhood home in Newton, memories flooded back. Learning to ride my bike on this curved path. Mom planting tulips along the front walk, laughing as I tried to help, but mostly just made mud pies. Dad teaching me to change oil in the garage. Now, an ambulance might have just taken him away forever, and our last conversation had been a pointless argument about his investment choices. I slammed the car into park, not even bothering to close the door properly as I sprinted toward the house, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I burst through the front door, expecting chaos. Medical equipment, paramedics, something. Instead, the foyer was oddly still. The only sound was the tick-tock of Mom's antique grandfather clock that still stood in the corner. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing against the high ceilings. "Diane? Where's Dad? Which hospital did they take him to?" That's when I noticed something strange. Through the archway into the living room, I could see several coats draped over the sofa, more than just Diane and her kids would need. The house smelled faintly of coffee and those expensive candles Diane always burned, not the antiseptic rush of emergency medical treatment. My tech entrepreneur brain, trained to spot patterns and inconsistencies, started firing warning signals. "Michael, thank goodness you're here." Diane appeared from the kitchen, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore a black dress that looked more appropriate for a business meeting than a medical emergency. No tear tracks on her makeup, no disheveled hair from anxious fingers running through it. "It's been absolutely terrible." Behind her, Tyler emerged, dressed in a button-up shirt and slacks, not exactly hospital or waiting room attire. He nodded at me with that smug half-smile I'd grown to hate. "Hey, bro. Rough day, huh?" Something about his casual tone made my skin crawl. "Where's Dad?" I demanded, already pulling out my phone. "Which hospital? I'll drive there now." My thumb hovered over the Uber app, ready to request a ride if I was too shaken to drive. Well, let's all sit down first," Diane said, placing her manicured hand on my arm, steering me not toward the door but deeper into the house. "There are some things we need to discuss before you see Robert." My confusion morphed into suspicion as she guided me toward the dining room. Why weren't we rushing to some emergency room? Why wasn't she a complete wreck if her husband had just been carted away in an ambulance? As we passed Dad's study, I noticed the door is ajar. Unusual, since Dad always kept it locked. "Shouldn't we be at the hospital? Did they say how bad it is?" I pressed, planting my feet at the dining room entrance. The large oak table was covered with papers, and seated around it were Jennifer, looking bored as she scrolled through her phone, and an older man I recognized as Harold Peterson, Dad's longtime attorney. Harold wouldn't meet my eyes when I walked in, suddenly very interested in adjusting his tie. "Michael, please sit," Diane insisted, her voice taking on that honeyed tone she used when trying to manipulate my father. "This is actually quite important. It's about your father's wishes." My blood ran cold. Was this some kind of end-of-life discussion? Had Dad's condition deteriorated so rapidly they were already talking about his will? I reluctantly took a seat, my eyes darting between their faces. Is he gone?" I managed to ask, my throat tight. "Oh no, nothing like that." Jennifer finally looked up from her phone, almost sounding disappointed. "Dad's fine." "What?" I stared at her, then at Diane. "You said he had a heart attack. You said the ambulance took him." "I may have exaggerated the situation slightly," Diane said, folding her hands primly on the table. "But we did need you here urgently. Robert is actually on a business trip to Chicago. He'll be back Friday." The room seemed to tilt sideways as I processed what Diane had just said. My father wasn't dying in some hospital. He wasn't even in the state. I'd canceled meetings, broken every speed limit, and nearly had a panic attack on the highway, all for nothing. "You lied about a heart attack?" I stood up so quickly my chair tipped backward, crashing against the hardwood floor. "What kind of sick person does that?" "Please, Michael, sit down and lower your voice," Harold Peterson said, pushing a folder toward me. "This is a delicate family matter that requires your immediate attention. Your father has been considering some adjustments to his estate planning." "Adjustments?" I repeated, not bothering to pick up the chair or sit back down. "And this required telling me my father was dying?" Diane sighed dramatically. "We knew you wouldn't come otherwise. You're always too busy with your little startup. This is about your father's legacy, our family's future." My eyes narrowed at her use of "our family," as if she hadn't married into it just 4 years ago. I reluctantly skimmed the documents Harold had pushed toward me. The technical legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out. Relinquishment of beneficiary status, transfer of interests, waiver of inheritance rights. "You're trying to get me to sign away my inheritance," I said flatly, my shock giving way to anger. "That's what this emergency is about?" Tyler leaned back in his chair, looking smug. "Dad's been stressed about the business distribution. It's affecting his health, his actual health. Mom's just looking out for him." "Your mother died 13 years ago," I snapped, earning a glare from both Tyler and Diane. "Your father and I have discussed this at length," Diane continued smoothly. "He feels the current arrangement is creating unnecessary tension. These documents simply formalize what would make everyone happier in the long run." Jennifer finally looked up from her phone. "Plus, it's not like you need the money, right? Your tech thing is doing well. We're just evening things out." I bit back a laugh. Evening things out? Dad built that company for 30 years before selling it. I helped him modernize it during college and my first years out of MIT. You two showed up 4 years ago and have contributed exactly nothing. Harold cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The proposal is quite generous, Michael. You'd retain ownership of the vacation property in Vermont, and there's a cash settlement of $500,000, 0 cents. Generous." I nearly choked. Dad's estate is worth over $20 million, and now you want me to sign away my share because, what, it would make Diane happier? "Your father is tired of the constant conflict," Diane said, her voice hardening. "This division would let everyone move on. He asked me to handle it because he knew you'd make a scene." She slid a pen toward me. "You can read through everything, but we need this resolved today. Your father expects it done when he returns." I looked around the table. Tyler was practically salivating at the prospect of getting his hands on Dad's money. Jennifer had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but was clearly on board. Harold was studiously avoiding eye contact, unusual for the typically straight-shooting attorney who'd known me since I was a kid. Something wasn't adding up. Dad and I had our disagreements, sure, but he would never cut me out like this. And he certainly wouldn't have Diane handle it instead of talking to me directly. The more I thought about it, the more this whole scenario stank of opportunism. "I need some time to review these," I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated. I needed to buy time to figure out what was really going on. "And some water. Mind if I get a glass from the kitchen?" "I'll get it." Tyler started to rise, but I waved him off. "No need. I know where the glasses are in my own childhood home." I gave him a tight smile. "I'll just be a minute. Then we can finalize everything." As I walked out, I could feel their eyes on my back. Something told me I'd better have a plan before I returned to that dining room. I didn't go to the kitchen. Instead, I slipped into Dad's study, quietly closing the door behind me. My heart was racing, but my mind had never been clearer. The study looked exactly as it always had. Leather chair worn in all the right places, shelves lined with engineering books and family photos, and the old mahogany desk where Dad had taught me to balance my first checkbook. What they didn't know, what Diane and her kids couldn't possibly know, was that Dad and I had had a very specific conversation last Thanksgiving. He'd pulled me aside after dinner, while Diane was showing off her new kitchen to some neighbors. "Michael," he'd said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something important. Diane's been asking a lot of questions about my will lately." He'd looked uncomfortable, running his hand through his thinning hair. "Nothing may come of it, but if anything ever seems off about my finances or estate, check the bottom drawer of my desk. The combination to the safe is your mother's birthday, month, day, year." At the time, I'd brushed it off as Dad being paranoid, maybe even a little unfair to Diane. Now, I dropped to my knees and opened the bottom right drawer of his desk. Behind a stack of file folders was a small digital safe I'd never seen before. My fingers trembled slightly as I punched in the numbers 05171963. The safe clicked open. Inside were several USB drives, a folder of documents, and a handwritten note in Dad's unmistakable engineer's block letters. "Michael, in case of emergency, trust your instincts." I grabbed one of the USB drives labeled Home Recordings and slipped it into my pocket, along with what looked like a notarized statement. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Tyler. "Need help finding water? LOL." I quickly closed the safe, making sure it locked, and straightened the folders in the drawer. Before leaving the study, I called Sarah, a nurse at Massachusetts General who had dated my college roommate and was still a good friend. "Hey Sarah, quick question," I whispered when she answered. "Has Robert Anderson been admitted there today? Heart attack?" No, I don't see any Robert Anderson in our system," she replied after a moment. "Want me to check other hospitals?" "No need. Thanks." I hung up, my suspicions confirmed. On my way to the kitchen, I glanced at the document I'd taken. It was a certified statement from Dad, dated just 2 months ago, explicitly confirming his wishes that his estate be divided as originally planned in his official will, with me receiving my fair share. He specifically noted concerns about undue influence and potential manipulation regarding any changes. I filled a glass with water from the tap, taking deep breaths. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just opportunism. This was a coordinated scam. Diane must have known Dad would never agree to cut me out, so she waited until he was away to make her move. What she didn't know was that my father, the careful, methodical engineer, had anticipated this and left me breadcrumbs to follow. I slipped the USB drive into my laptop, which I'd left in my bag by the front door, and quickly scanned its contents. There were dozens of video files, clearly from hidden cameras Dad had installed. I clicked on one from last week and saw Diane, Tyler, and Jennifer in this very dining room. "Once Michael signs these, we're set," Diane's voice came through clearly on the recording. "Robert will never know. The papers will be filed before he gets back from Chicago." "But what if Michael calls Dad to confirm?" Jennifer asked. "I've already told Robert I'm taking his phone in for repairs while he's gone," Diane replied. "He's using a temporary number only I have. By the time they talk, it'll be too late." I'd seen enough. I closed my laptop, slid it back into my bag, and walked back to the dining room, water in hand and a new plan forming in my mind. As I re-entered the dining room, I plastered a look of resignation on my face. Everyone seemed to relax slightly. They thought I was defeated, cornered, ready to surrender my birthright without a fight. I set my water glass down carefully and pulled my chair back up to the table. "I've had some time to think," I said quietly, letting my shoulders slump forward. "And I guess you're right. Dad and I have been distant lately. Maybe this is what he wants." Diane's perfectly lined lips curved into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "I'm glad you're being reasonable, Michael. This really is best for everyone." Harold pushed the documents toward me again, indicating where to sign. His hands were trembling slightly, the only person in the room with enough conscience to be uncomfortable with what was happening. I picked up the pen, letting it hover over the signature line. Tyler leaned forward eagerly, while Jennifer finally put her phone down to watch. The room was so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. 1, 2, 3 ticks. "Before I sign," I said, my voice casual, "I just have one quick question for Harold." I turned to the attorney. "Harold, you've been our family lawyer for what, 20 years now? You helped Dad set up his first commercial property purchase when I was still in high school." Harold nodded cautiously. "Yes, that's correct." "So you were there when he updated his will after marrying Diane, right? You know exactly what his wishes are." Harold's face paled slightly. Yes, I was involved in those discussions." "And did my father ever express to you that he wanted to cut me out of my inheritance? Ever?" The attorney glanced nervously at Diane, who was glaring at him with such intensity I was surprised he didn't burst into flames. "Harold is not at liberty to discuss confidential client matters," Diane cut in sharply. "Actually," I said, setting down the pen and reaching for my bag, "I think we should all discuss some confidential matters." I pulled out my laptop and set it on the table. "Like this conversation from last week that Dad happened to record?" The blood drained from Diane's face as I turned the screen toward them and hit play. Their own voices filled the room, crystal clear, plotting to defraud both me and my father. Jennifer's eyes went wide, and Tyler froze mid-smugness. "Robert will never know. The papers will be filed before he gets back from Chicago. But what if Michael calls Dad to confirm?" "I've already told Robert I'm taking his phone in for repairs while he's gone. He's using a temporary number only I have. By the time they talk, it'll be too late." I stopped the video and looked around the table. There's about 40 more recordings just like this one. Dad installed security cameras after some items went missing from his study last year. Funny how they captured so much more than potential thieves. This is an invasion of privacy," Diane spluttered, her composure finally cracking. "You can't just—" "I also have this," I interrupted, placing Dad's notarized statement on the table, a legally binding document witnessed and notarized in which Dad explicitly states that any changes to his will during his business trips should be considered suspicious and potentially fraudulent. I smiled thinly. "He really does know you well, doesn't he?" Tyler jumped to his feet. "You can't prove anything. It'll be your word against ours." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I just got off a call with Dad about 15 minutes ago." That was a lie, but they didn't need to know that. Turns out, his personal cell works just fine. He's very interested in seeing these videos when he gets back on Friday. Harold began gathering his papers with shaking hands. "I want no part of this. I was told Robert had authorized these changes. If that's not the case, I'm removing myself immediately." "Save it, Harold," I said coldly. "You've known this family long enough to know better. Dad will be dealing with your bar association next week." Diane's perfect facade had completely crumbled, her face contorted with rage as she realized her plan had failed spectacularly. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Your father would have seen reason eventually. We're his real family now, not you with your judgmental attitude and constant reminders of his past." "My mother was not just his past," I said, my voice deadly quiet. And Dad may have been blinded by whatever you offered him 4 years ago, but he's not stupid. Deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Why else would he have set up those cameras? Jennifer, surprisingly, was the first to break. Mom, I told you this was going too far. I told you he wouldn't just sign. I stood up, collecting my laptop and the evidence. I'll be taking these for safekeeping. I suggest you all find somewhere else to be when Dad gets home Friday. I've already forwarded copies of everything to my attorney. The looks on their faces as I walked out were indeed priceless. Diane's mask of sophistication shattered into naked fury. Tyler's smug confidence transformed into panic. Jennifer's bored indifference replaced by genuine fear. And Harold's professional demeanor dissolved into shameful regret. As I got into my car, I finally let myself breathe. Dad had always taught me to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best, a lesson that had served me well in business, and, as it turned out, in family matters too. I pulled out my phone and dialed his real number, which I'd had all along. Dad, yeah, it's me. We need to talk about Diane. No, you're not overreacting. In fact, you might want to cut your trip short. Trust me, you're going to want to see what I found.